So I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar, and it's all about how employee experience affects customer experience and how to succeed at both. And we're very fortunate today to have a really excellent panel to be able to go and help walk us through some of the ins and outs and tips and do's and don'ts about being able to help affect employee experience and customer experience as well. And just to give you a quick agenda, a quick overview in terms of how we'll run today's session, the very first part of it is just in terms of looking at the speaker introduction. We'll have a chance to introduce the panel to you. And as well, we'll look at how does employee experience affect customer experience is the first question. We'll have some great discussions around that. And also, what can enterprise contact centers do to improve employee experience, especially if they have multiple sites and or remote agents? And that's a big challenge right now in terms of how geographically spread out a lot of different contact center sites are. And we'll also talk about how does the introduction of new technology, such as artificial intelligence and omnichannel, affect employee experience and or customer experience. Because there's so many more channels available now to communicate, and it also involves a lot of different skill sets as well. And finally, we'll wrap things up with a quick Q&A as well going forward. First, I want to introduce today's panel. We've got an excellent panel. I just want to introduce the different speakers that are here and give you a chance as well for everyone just to go and introduce or be seen as well. So introduce, first of all, Marty Tracey. So Marty, I want to welcome you to today's panel, and I love the space theme behind you, as well as the space music going on as well. And Marty is the CEO of Intelligence, which is a unified communications and cloud contact center provider as well. So I'll introduce as well Erica. And Erica Marois is the content manager for ICMI. And ICMI, of course, is just an excellent resource when it comes to contact center information and latest trends and techniques. And also, I know, Erica, you write a lot of blogs and articles as well. So welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome. And I'll introduce as well Neal Dlin. And Neal is the Chief Customer Obsessed Officer. I like that title for Choristry, which is a company that actually specializes in terms of employee engagement, the employee journey, which I know we'll speak about in a few moments, as well as customer experience as well. So Neal, welcome to the panel.
Thanks, Mike.
You're welcome. And what we'll do right now is start with the very first question, and that is, how does employee experience affect customer experience? And Neal, turn things over to you if you want to talk for just a moment about how does employee experience affect customer experience. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts would be hard to contain in this time we have, but I'll try to be brief. I think everyone understands intuitively that employee experience affects customer experience. I think sometimes we often some have a limited scope of belief on how that actually works. Sometimes people are thinking only in terms of what kind of training does your frontline, your customer-facing employees have, or what kind of tools do they have. And those certainly are important elements of how employee experience impacts customer experience. But it actually goes so much deeper, and it goes to so many more employees than just your customer-facing employees. You've got employees that are in downstream positions, often in areas like legal or risk or certain areas of IT or HR, and these employees' experiences also have an impact on customer experience. When you look at really incredible organizations that are highly customer-centric, that have some element of customer centricity really in their purpose, in their mission statement, in their values, and their operating principles, it actually integrates down into employee journeys. And so you've got employees at all aspects of the company that have usually some kind of a goal that is customer experience driven. There's a high degree of transparency and communication, sharing what customer feedback is provided. And that allows people to create, or allows people to make decisions in a very different way. If you think about, I'm thinking about a client I once had who had somebody on the legal team who had very specific goals to what the legal team does. And so they created a really great application form for credit application. And it had every legal element you could possibly imagine in it. And so they hit their goal. But had that legal person had a customer experience goal, had visibility into customer experience data, they might see that the degree to which they were avoiding risk far exceeded the degree to which they were deteriorating the customer experience, even though they don't directly interface with customers. So those are the less obvious because they're downstream type of roles. But then the more obvious, even when you're talking about frontline, it isn't just the training. That whole entire employee experience comes through to the customer experience. And I think we've all had one of those calls where we've called the contact center, and your problem that you have doesn't quite fit into the prescribed approach that agent was given or the prescribed policy. And you hear those awful words where the person you're speaking to says, well, that's not their policy. They won't let me do this. And you got to imagine how bad it is when your employee is separating themselves from the organization. versus an employee who is if you're at a party and you ask, hey, where do you work? And they say, oh, this is where I work and it's amazing and my boss is so great and we are really recognized for the hard work that we do and we have such a noble goal in what we're trying to achieve. That employee will never separate themselves from the company. They're going to create new ways of solving problems that you couldn't possibly prescribe. So it's the obvious stuff, the direct touch stuff, it's the back office and the other departments, and it's also the less obvious overall employee experience that really drives a leading customer experience.
Well, Neal, that's a really great example in terms of just what you talked about, in terms of how it really impacts in real life. You know, how customers are impacted by this, how employees are impacted by this. And that's really great to hear as well. And I want to turn things over now to Erica to be able to go and share some information in terms of, you know, again, how does employee experience affect customer experience? So Erica, over to you.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you, Neal, and thanks, Mike, for the opportunity. So I guess what I would add here is that, you know, everyone says that happy employees make happy customers, but I would actually argue that engaged employees make happy customers. And I do think that there's a difference, right? So I think you can be satisfied with your day-to-day work environment without feeling engaged or tied to any clear purpose. And I think the research supports that engagement is really the key to success. So just a couple quick examples. There was a Gallup poll that I'm sure you've all heard reference to by now that said that companies with highly engaged employees actually outperform their competition by almost 150%, which is huge. And I recently read an article in Forbes by customer experience futurist Michelle Morgan, and she pointed out something really interesting. She said that for the companies that scored in the top 25th percentile for employee engagement, they actually saw an average of 10% higher customer satisfaction scores. So, I mean, that's a pretty direct link between employee experience, customer experience. You know, what perhaps is even more interesting to me is that a few years back, we here at ICMI conducted a research survey. We surveyed about 500 contact center employees. And you know, we found the opposite to be true. We saw a direct link between agent apathy and poor customer experiences. So, and then even more fascinating, what we found was that in many cases, it's actually the contact center leaders that are unintentionally causing agent apathy. So I'll give you just an example there. So 85% of the people we surveyed said that agent loyalty was a top priority for them. But in other questions in the survey, we seem to see a dissonance between their actions and what they were saying. So, for example, a large majority, more than 80% of the people who took this survey acknowledged that the agent-facing applications that they used were not allowing their agents to provide the best customer experience. They were inefficient. But then later on in the survey, we found that low on the priority list for financial investment was investing in new agent-facing applications. You know, the top financial priority was cutting costs. So, you know, it's interesting to see that in many ways we're actually preventing our agents from being empowered to provide great customer experiences, and that's a frustrating experience for them too. I think it's counterintuitive and counterproductive because you think about how expensive it is to hire, recruit, train, and onboard new agents. And then you think about metrics like customer lifetime value. We're just hurting ourselves if really the goal is to save costs. And then, you know, another thing that I'll point out is that really when you think about employee engagement, employee motivation, you've got to think about all of the little things, the little messages that we're sending to agents. You know, contact centers are notorious for holding agents accountable for all sorts of metrics, one being average handle time, for example. So we see a lot of people have average handle time forefront on the agent scorecards, but they also claim to be customer-centric. So to Neal's point, what behaviors are we driving with the metrics that we put in front of agents? Navy Federal Credit Union is a really good case study. They won an award a year back for best customer experience, and they totally overhauled their QA and customer experience program and took QA scores off of those agent scorecards, and instead they started coaching behaviors that led to positive customer outcomes. And what they found was not only did their quality scores improve, they had higher customer satisfaction rates and higher employee engagement rates. So it was really a win-win for all involved. And then one final note that I'll touch on here is that I think sometimes we overlook how all of our little behaviors as leaders do impact the employee experience and the customer experience. So all the little details, like, are you showing up late to conference calls? Are you taking the time to build rapport with your frontline agents? All of those little things send a message to the employees who are dealing with our customers about how you want them to exhibit empathy, what sort of time you want them to spend with customers. So that's another thing to consider too.
Okay, great. And Erica, those are great points as well, because it just took, again, role modeling the right behaviors, right? Going forward. So I like that. And Marty, we'll turn things over to you as well in terms of what your thoughts are when it comes to looking at the relationship between employee experience and customer experience as well.
So with my background, my approach this, I do most things from the technology side of things. And if we look at the technologies that are available today, the new channels for customers and prospects to communicate with companies, we can see better access provided, increased efficiency. You can provide quicker access to information and education. Often this results in automation of a lot of manual tasks and quick access for customers to free up agents' times for communications that require a higher level of engagement than something that an automated experience can provide. So in today's world, when frontline technology is properly deployed and supported, it can have a very positive effect on the employee experience, which translates to better agent accessibility, focus, and performance. If we look at what was said previously, giving agents access to the information quickly, giving them access to customer history, real-time interactions, allows them to do a better job, to be efficient, which is the base desire of all agents, is to want to be able to excel and perform at their job and be engaged, be engaged in the resolution process, the problem-solving process, being able to solve customer issues and giving them the tools to make it happen. If I think back to Erica's example of, how long an agent is on a call, the better access they have to the tools, the quicker they can create a resolution. So not only is there improved engagement and from the employee side of things, but you see an overall improved performance. So I think Erica is completely correct in that, you really need to give agents the tools, the education, the accessibility to do their job if you want to, basically hold them statistically accountable for performance. Stepping past the front line, if we dig deeper into where technologies can affect EX, improve the work environment experience, integrations to key databases, that give employees the real-time access to the things that they worry about within their own job, scheduling, PTO, healthcare, payroll, 401k, other aspects that allow them to be engaged in their own productivity, their own growth, their own training, and their own performance. It also allows agents to be empowered to contribute, communicate with management, and have an environment where the entire team is engaged. So using technology to improve engagement, to improve efficiency, and to allow agents to do their job is a key piece to having the whole EX experience create a better CX environment for the customer base. I mean, behind all of this, we know that the largest gains an organization is going to get in CX comes from engaged employees, lower turnover, and strong employee engagement. So there's a lot of great technologies out there today to help improve these environments. But in the end, we have to start with improving internally and getting an engaged agent in line if we want to affect CX.
Okay, all right, and those are really great points as well in terms of just how the technology works together, with the people side of the business. They're great points in terms of doing that. And if we look at our next question in terms of this, what can enterprise contact centers do to improve employee experience? And especially if they have, multiple sites or remote agents. It's always a challenge when it comes to people being geographically spread out so much, different time zones, etc. And so we'll start off actually with Erica, if you want to respond back to this in terms of what can they do to be able to help address some of these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great question. And personally, it's one I connect to because I happen to work from home and a lot of my colleagues on my team work from home too. So I think before we get into any tactics here, it's important to kind of level set and think about an overall strategy for engagement first, because This is what so many companies really struggle to do. I think for so many executives and leaders, employee experience is still thought of in terms of fringe benefits like free lunches or commuter assistance. But in reality, none of that really makes a big difference unless there's a clear purpose behind it all. Because regardless of where your team members work, what shifts they're working, there are a few common drivers of employee engagement. I think perhaps the most important one is having a clear mission or purpose to follow. And when I talk about a mission, I don't just mean some aspirational statement that you put in your marketing materials on your website or frame on your wall. I think the missing piece of that puzzle for a lot of people is making sure that all of their processes and policies align with that mission. And then even beyond that, that they're holding their people accountable for supporting that mission. So, I touched on this a bit with the last question, but contact centers are so notorious for holding employees accountable for metrics, but how often are contact center employees, or really employees in any industry, held accountable for the way that they treat their colleagues? And then, what sort of behaviors are you encouraging with your metrics? Are you encouraging your agents to compete against each other or against other teams? Or are you fostering an environment of collaboration? So that's what I'd say first. Second, I would say you have to make sure that your employees feel heard. That's just a common need on the hierarchy of needs. So regardless, again, of where your employees are working, when they're working, how old they are, what their position is, you've got to give all of your employees an equal platform for sharing their feedback, because you're going to have a hard time getting them invested in that mission if you're not soliciting that feedback from them. And let's face it, some of the best customer feedback comes from the front lines. But then even beyond that, I would say perhaps even more importantly, you've got to make sure you have a process in place to act on that employee feedback, because if your employees feel like you're not listening to them, their opinion doesn't matter, they're going to get frustrated. And the way the economy is right now, the way the labor market is right now, if they're frustrated, they've got other options to leave. So that's a critical part of it. And it sounds so simple, but we see so many organizations maybe host like a half-day breakout meeting to brainstorm ways to improve culture, and then after that meeting, nothing happens. So make sure that as you're getting feedback from your employees, that you are assigning clear action items, owners for those action items, and deadlines to make sure that those changes take place. Because if you're not going to follow through on that feedback, there's absolutely no point in soliciting the feedback in the first place. So that's what I would say from a strategic perspective. Now, on a more tactical level, I read an article a few weeks back, and it was talking about how HubSpot does things to foster better culture among their remote teams. And one thing that I really like that they do is they host 1 week every year where the folks who normally work in the office work remotely for a week. So maybe they go work from home or they work from a coffee shop, whatever the case might be. They found that it's really an invaluable way for them to glean insight into what it's actually really like to do the job remotely, because some people, I think, have misconceptions about what that's really like. And so they said that by doing this, they've become more empathetic to some of the pain points that those remote team members face when they work from home, but they've also been able to glean really practical ways that they can improve the employee experience for those who work remotely. So whether that's making updates to the intranet so they have access to the latest knowledge they need, or rethinking the way meetings are structured to better engage remote team members. I think the flip side is true too. So even if it's only once a year, I think it's a great idea to bring remote team members into the office to work if you can. It's nice to have them, of course, come in for like holiday parties or team building activities, but have them work for a few days in the office too, because I think some of the miscommunications and frustrations and misunderstandings that occur between team members in different locations is that they just have never had the chance to walk in each other's shoes. So that can be just a really powerful way to help team members step into each other's shoes. And then the last thing I'll say is that if you're hosting fun activities in the office, don't forget about the folks back home or in other locations too. So couple quick examples. If you're having a training or a motivational speaker come in, there's so much free video technology to enable you to live broadcast that to other team members in other locations, or to even record it so they can watch it later if they're in another time zone. If you're planning a volunteer day for your office location, encourage other offices to get involved too. Encourage even the remote team members to take an hour or two off and do something similar. If you're having lunch catered in, send an e-gift card to your remote team members to make sure that they feel included in the process too. I mean, I think all of these little small gestures just send the message to your employees that no matter where they're working, no matter which shift they're working, that they're very much a part of the team and that they matter too.
Okay, great, Erica. Those are really great ideas as well, just to, again, get all the remote agents and different time zones, different sites, et cetera, to really work together and improve the idea about being able to go and have that kind of employee engagement. So thank you for that. And we're going to turn over to Marty as well. So Marty will turn things over to you, and you can also, really give your ideas in terms of what can enterprise contact centers do to improve employee experience, especially if they have multiple sites and or remote agents as well.
Technology has come a long way in improving the ability to engage and bring remote offices and employees into the company culture. The tools that are available today and can be used from the user's desktop, utilizing tools and functions like persistent chat, team chat, video, web conferencing, can really improve a remote office or remote worker's engagement on a peer-to-peer level, on a team level, and on an everyday action level. Internally within our organization, every Monday, we have a meeting where we've got remote folks on video. We've got our Toronto office on video, and it goes a long way to improving communication. The ironic thing about seeing somebody on video every week, I will be in our Toronto office next week, and it won't seem like I haven't seen them in person in 45 days because I see a lot of them every Monday. From a management perspective, it's also very important. Video can be a great tool when it comes to team meetings because it ratchets up the level of engagement. You can tell from the look on a person's face if they're staring at an email, if they're listening, if they're engaged. It helps them feel engaged in the process. It helps them, contribute and be part of what's going on with all the activities and actions. For remote office workers, persistent chat, team chat, really gives them the peer-to-peer interactions in real time that they didn't get from email and often even voice. So that one of the great things about these tools is that folks that work remotely, which is often where they want to be, they're still part of the office environment. They're not hearing things after the fact. They've got real-time engagement, which, this plays a very large role in expanding the company's culture and energy to other aspects of the organization, regardless of the geography. So when restricted, one of the great things that video can provide is that real in-person experience. So technology has come a long way to, eliminating that remoteness of being out of the office or working from home and giving you the ability to engage in real-time interactions with other team members.
And Marty, those are really great points as well. I like that you brought that out, in terms of just being able to highlight how the technology works and helps people. And of course, using, that kind of technology here in terms of this webinar to be able to communicate and from different cities. Marty, you're in San Diego. Neal, you're in Toronto. I'm just west of Toronto. Et cetera. Erica, I know you're in the States as well. So just as a chance to really use technology to help leverage those things as well. And in fact, Neal, we'll turn things over to you to go and take a look at what your thoughts are on this topic. So Neal, please go ahead and share.
Thanks, Mike. Well, first off, I could completely concur with everything Erica and Marty said, both some of the tactics that Erica talked about, some of the technology that Marty talked about. Video is highly accessible and not expensive these days. You can certainly easily communicate remotely via video, and it makes a big difference. There's an old saying, of course, proximity is power, and a lot of that just has to do with being able to see somebody and see the reactions that they have and making sure that they're engaged and included. I would say from a strategic standpoint, there's an expression that I think some of my clients, some of my teams are maybe tired of hearing me say, which is consistency can be the killer of greatness, and live in the gray, because the black and white is often not going to get you where you want to go. And what I mean by that when it comes to enterprise contact centers with multiple locations or remote agents is I would caution anyone to be you have to do those things that Erica talked about. You have to have not just a purpose-driven aspirational statement, which you definitely should have, but how does that trickle down into all your operating practices and all your journeys? You have to have communication, and whether it be through technology or other means, face-to-face, you have to have transparency and communication. But where I guess I would caution or advise people is avoid the idea that everything has to be exactly the same for everybody in every location. I think that's where a lot of centers fall down, is they fall to this notion of consistency. And I think, a great example of where that can go awry, and I don't know if everyone knows this, and I don't even know if it's still grade 8, and maybe it's dropped to grade 4, but I know that newspapers for many years were written to a certain level of education so that they could be accessible to everybody. And so in order to do that, they limit the ability and the skill and some of the flair that a writer can have, because they have to drop that down for everyone to be able to do it. And it's the same thing can happen with consistency across multiple sites, is you can often have to not just dumb down what everyone is doing, but you're actually closing doors on what's possible to be done. Where you can be aware of geographical nuances, leadership nuances, different sites will have cultural nuances while still being part of the overall culture. So I guess my advice to multiple sites is, while you're making sure you've got great policies and practices, and you're communicating and making sure you're not forgetting about these other sites, because oftentimes wherever the most senior leader is, that site gets the most communication. You have to do it in a way that isn't to say, you have to do this and you have to do it exactly this way, but more to say, here's an outcome we're trying to have. We're trying to get everyone to know what's going on. If we're talking about communication for a second, we're trying to make sure everyone knows what's happening. We're trying to make sure everyone understood what's happening. We're trying to make sure everyone was engaged in the conversation. We were trying to make sure that feedback was solicited. So think about those kinds of outcomes that you might want in a communication, versus saying, here's the communication package. You have to deliver it exactly this way in every location. Think about the kinds of outcomes. How do you measure those outcomes? And then you're giving a little bit more flexibility for each location, or if you're dealing with leaders managing remote agents, you're giving that flexibility for them to do it in a way that's most effective for their site or for their team. So I think that would be just more of, I guess you could say, consistency can be the killer of greatness. When I say live in the gray, it's similar in the sense that you don't want to, when you prescribe anything too heavily, and this is obviously true when we talk about frontline agents on the phones, and you script them too heavily, but the same thing can happen to leaders, and leaders' engagement sometimes gets overlooked. Oftentimes we talk about employee engagement and everyone just thinks frontline. How do we make sure the frontline's engaged? Well, I think Erica made a point earlier, if the leadership's not engaged, you're going to have a big problem. You're certainly not going to have frontline engaged employees. So when you overly prescribe and script the leadership, while you can for sure know that they did it the way you wanted them to, that's the black and white, and that's the easier approach. Live in the gray. Don't be afraid of the gray. Don't be afraid to create loose enough guidelines for people to personalize and to manage those things in the way that makes the most sense for them. So, and everything else that Marty and Erica said, I completely agree with. I didn't want to repeat too much of what they said, so that's just one last additional piece I'd add.
Okay, great, Neal. I appreciate that as well. And it's really great points there, especially about consistency, because you're right, sometimes it is overemphasized. And also, I love your point about just leaders, being engaged as well, not just the front line, which is what we usually think about with employee engagement. And, for the next question we'll do is take a look in terms of, what does it mean in terms of being able to look at technology? And I know Marty will turn to you in just a moment for that. How does the introduction of new technology such as AI and omnichannel affect employee experience and or customer experience as well? And Marty, will turn things over to you so you can actually share with the group in terms of what your thoughts are in terms of technology.
Sure. Well, two terms we hear a ton of nowadays, omnichannel and AI. They promise to revolutionize EX and CX. So like many changes in technology, especially on the EX side, they can spark as much fear as they do excitement. But, a good plan to utilize these technologies will have a very positive effect on both the EX and CX side of things. For employees, a well-planned deployment of omnichannel and AI functionality helps reduce the amount of repetitive manual tasks an agent performs in a day. Will give them access quickly to information they need to execute on their jobs. For us, we see this creating a shift in the type of job an agent performs, with more focus on higher level interactions that require the agent's ability in human communication and problem skills. Humans operate outside of the script. AI today still operates for the most part inside the script within building out facts. The AI is not allowing for detailed decision making or problem solving. So what we're seeing is a drive to specialization and a large demand for kind of specific skills in the contact center that are focused around the human expertise. The agent's value will increase as manual tasks are eliminated and agents' impact on measurable performance is increased. So, as we discussed earlier, any improvement in the EX world will have a positive effect on customer experience because employees still have the biggest role when it comes to affecting customer satisfaction. Humans solve problems using compassion and empathy as opposed to just providing facts, where we are with a lot of our AI and interactions today. So the human remains to us the key component. If we combined this with what customers are getting, if we combine the EX effect with customers getting their choice of access to information and improved timing, you start to create larger gains in the customer service experience. All of this for us is on the vision roadmap to creating what we consider the ultimate, which is proactive customer service. Omnichannel and AI tools will begin to allow us to anticipate the customer's needs, and addressing the customer need before it happens is possibly the highest level of customer service. And we see examples of this in today's economies where a lot of retail, folks like Amazon are anticipating based on your regular usage, your needs, and you'll get home and something's there waiting for you because you've prescribed and allowed it. And if you're solving a problem before it even occurs, you're really reaching possibly the highest level of customer service. And properly utilized, these tools are going to begin and continue to improve these experiences. With the potential advantages of AI, omnichannel, they can bring the most important thing really to remember is that the contact center success and failure will still reside around the humans that design these experiences, that manage them and run them on a daily basis. Erica's talked a lot about the employee interaction piece, their engagement, and none of these technologies will work properly without that engagement. For those of you who are leading contact centers out there, with our experience in being part of all of these projects, I would really encourage you, if you plan to really utilize AI, if you plan to utilize the omnichannel experience, it's very important that you build out a roadmap of that experience. Start with where your contact center sits today and project what your vision is for the future. What does your perfect contact center environment look like? And then create a very purposeful, project-driven roadmap that has step-by-step improvements to get to that vision. It's far too often that we see, contact centers trying to jump from where they are today to that vision way down the road in one fell swoop. And that's where you see a lot of dissatisfaction with AI and other omnichannel interactions. I know we've all experienced where we start in a chat, we get to a certain point on a website, we really need to know more and we're stuck. We can't escalate to an agent experience, we can't get to a different knowledge base, and we end up abandoning the experience altogether. So it's definitely something you want to focus with the technology in a step-by-step process. But the humans are going to drive the best experience in utilizing these technologies.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marty. Appreciate that. And some great points there in terms of just having that roadmap and knowing where you want to go and blending the employee experience with the technology and how well that works together. And Neal, we'll turn over to you in terms of what your thoughts are in terms of looking at technology and employee experience.
Yeah, I think Marty made so many good points that I agree with. I think I'm just going to somewhat separate out AI and omnichannel just for a second because they really are quite different. And I think we've talked a lot over the last 5 years or so about omnichannel. So I'm going to focus just a little bit more on AI, if that's okay. I think AI is fascinating in what it can do both to employee experience and customer experience, and not necessarily in the most obvious ways. I think one of the biggest risks to AI, aside from everyone being fearful that it might remove jobs, which I think Marty makes a strong point, which is that it, if anything, it emphasizes the value of the employee. AI, at least at this stage in the game, is handling the more simplistic tasks. And that means the person on the phone has to handle the more complex and the more humane or human experience type tasks. So I think there's a great opportunity for organizations who capitalize on that and really create a culture where employees can do that. And I think that's where the risk really lies for most. Contact centers, for all of us who have been in them for a long time, have, despite some polish and shine and some amazing technological advancements, the way that they're run from now to they were 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I started in them is essentially the same. I mean, there's a shift in some of the metrics. Some of the metric weighting is different. Maybe there's a little bit more of a deprioritization on things like handle time for the agent. Maybe there's a slightly different quality form than there used to be. Maybe there's a slightly different set of interview questions or training process, and there's better tools for delivering some of these things for sure. But how they're managed in 25 years has not had a dramatic disruption, and I think that is has to change. I think as AI comes into play, just like all the other self-serve channels, but has the potential to pick up so much more of those done right. It has the potential to pick up so much more of those basic type inquiries. The way that contact centers used to be run, which was very much like factory, widget unit. There's, 80% of contacts are going to be this question. You answer it with this answer and you move on. And that's how it was back in the old, I think forgot what airline it was, and it was somewhat known for being the first contact center and telcos as well. But that isn't the case anymore. So all of the processes that we have that create, and I know I'm harping on the idea of consistency again, but all those processes that we have to create that cookie cutter experience now will crush the great customer-centric employees' motivation, because that's not what's happening. That employee who gets that contact isn't like the other 80% of contacts they got. They're actually getting the more edge cases. They're getting more of the outliers. They're getting things that are more complex than looking up an answer in a knowledge base. So having to rethink who we hire, how we screen, how we prepare them for success, how we continue their education, what behaviors, I know Erica talked about this as well, what behaviors do we recognize? Because it isn't AHT or even some of the other more soft metrics. It's things like how does someone think out of the box? How does someone go the extra mile? How does someone come to a complete resolution? How does someone chase down oftentimes other parts of the organization, because certain issues are no longer so easily resolved without having to spread out to other parts of the organization. So how do you network? How do you integrate with other parts, other companies, other counterparts in the organization? All of these things have to make us challenge how we are managing contact centers, who we're hiring, how we're preparing them for success. The last thing I'll say about employee experience and AI, which I think is another fascinating opportunity, is there's a few companies doing this, but most companies are still thinking about AI as, here's a great way to cut costs and take a bunch of contacts out of the contact center. But AI is a fascinating tool for agents. It's a fascinating way to really improve what is mostly static knowledge bases today. So in terms of training, when it's no longer the 80-20 rule, when most of your contacts might be varied or complex, it is much harder to create a knowledge base and sustain a knowledge base that you just to get answers, and it can take a long time for agents to be able to navigate that. AI can be a great internally facing tool that agents can use in order to get some of the more accurate fact part answers for their solution, so that they can then add their human element and deliver those in a way that makes customers really feel taken care of and done fast. Because as much as humanity and care and empathy is critical to the experience, still statistically one of the highest weighted impacts, according to J.D. Power, of that experience is timeliness. So how quickly you can resolve it, while maybe is slightly less important than resolving it and doing it with care, it's still really important. So that kind of internal AI tool, which some companies are already, I wish I could remember the names. There's a few great case studies of companies who are using this internally for their agents. So that would be two things I would say impact employee experience and can impact customer experience from AI.
Okay, great, Neal. I appreciate that. Some great examples there in terms of how those really work together. And Eric, I'll turn the spotlight over to you in terms of what your thoughts are in terms of looking at technology and how it affects customer experience.
Yeah, so I absolutely agree with everything that Marty and Neal have shared. So I'll be brief in the interest of not being super repetitive, but a couple of other things I'll add to the conversation here. So I'm glad that Neal brought up the piece about knowledge management, because I was having a conversation with a couple of contact center leaders just a month or so ago, and they're in the process of rolling out new chatbots to serve their customers. And they shared that one of the things that was most surprising to them is all of the legwork that you need to do up front to make sure that your knowledge base is up to snuff, so that the chatbot is fed the proper information to better help customers as well as agents. So that's something important to consider. From an AI perspective, I think a lot of leaders and executives are most excited about the prospects of, again, cost savings. But I think we really need to take a step back and think about how we might use AI to really better empower our customers and our agents to make their lives easier. One thing that I've been interested to follow recently is the advent of this AI technology that actually helps to humanize the customer experience. And what I mean is that it actually empowers agents by responding in real time to customer interactions, and it senses sentiment and tone and mood and helps suggest to agents better ways that they might be able to respond and personalize that customer experience. So that, to me, is something that's on my radar. I think we're going to see more companies adopting technology like that over the next couple of years, because as much as we love to talk about all these technologies, the bottom line is that our customers do still crave human interactions, and there's still plenty of issues that need resolving that they still turn to the phone for. Our latest research shows that phone is still the #1 channel for customer interactions. So that's what I would add in terms of AI. As far as omnichannel goes, it's interesting because I know, Marty and Neal both said we've been talking about omnichannel for a while now, and it still kind of feels like a buzzword. I think because a lot of contact centers are still really in the mode of multi-channel customer engagement, and they're wanting to move towards omni-channel. But, as you're doing that, I think it's important to take a look again at agent skill sets and trainings. I've seen a lot of contact centers make the mistake of assuming that just because an agent performs really well on the phone that they can take on email and chat too, and maybe that's not the case. It requires totally different skill sets. And then, in terms of both omnichannel and AI and how they're changing the complexity of customer interactions and therefore the complexity of the job for our frontline employees, again, Neal and Marty both said this is changing the career trajectory. It's going to change the way we train, but also beyond that, you really need to start thinking now about how that's going to change the way you compensate these employees. If they're tasked with handling more complex interactions, not only are you going to have to provide them with the training and resources they need to do so, but think about the resources you're going to need to allocate to hire and recruit those employees and make sure that the compensation level is up to snuff with what you're asking them to do. So that's what I would add there. Again, I think Neal and Marty brought up some great points, and personally, I'm just interested to see more organizations really start to adopt AI over the next year or so in the contact center. It's definitely something on my radar for 2019.
Okay, great. Thanks, Erica. And those are some really great points too, especially about the impact of AI, and also you're right about multi-channel. A lot of companies are still struggling with that, let alone getting to true omni-channel as well. Some great points there. And that's a chance for us to actually, in addition to what we've talked about so far, actually share some ideas in terms of questions and answers from the audience as well. And in fact, there's been some great questions out there. We got a question actually from Alex, and he was asking in terms of how does a quality assurance program affect in terms of employee engagement? And I'll actually open this up. We have time. I know we want to be conscious of time, so just ask in terms of if any one of you wants to speak up on this topic. You can just speak up about that right now if you'd like. And we'll have a chance just for one of you to answer. So Erica, if you want to address this one.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I could talk about this all day, so if you want to sidebar, feel free to contact me afterwards. I would say QA has a huge impact on the employee engagement and can be positive or negative. That's up to you. So traditionally, we've seen a lot of contact centers handle QA in almost a Big Brother type style where there's a long checklist and you're just checking boxes off, making sure agents are doing certain things or hitting certain targets. And that often causes agents to resent the process. What we're seeing the most successful organizations do now is kind of flip the script. And like I mentioned earlier with the Navy Federal Credit Union example, instead of focusing on checking boxes off or arriving at a score, they're really focusing on driving appropriate behaviors. And then to take it even a step further from that, they're tying the skills and behaviors that they're tracking to really clear career paths within the contact center or even within the organization as a whole. So I think it's time to rethink the way we present the QA process to agents. If we make it about gotcha moments, then no, that's not going to be good for employee engagement. But if we make it about how we're investing in their success and partnering with them to be more successful and to make our customers more successful, then I think it can have a very positive impact on employee engagement.
Okay, great. Thanks, Erica. I appreciate that. And I also have a second question as well, and I'll open this up actually, Marty or Neal, just in terms of taking, if turns whoever wants to speak on this one, is just a question from Jonathan actually, asking about, do you have some examples about how you've improved employee engagement for the front line, within the front line or the leadership team, that was initially a proposed change which was difficult to get the executive team to agree to, or one that was perceived that was kind of counter to other goals? So I guess part of this is just being able to get the buy-in from senior levels. And I don't know if either Marty or Neal, if you want to address this.
I'm happy to pick up on that one.
Neal,
I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think. There's so many examples. Oftentimes some of the most interesting changes are opposed in the beginning, and sometimes they do seem counterintuitive. One example that pops up, I'm only going to talk about briefly because I think we kind of have talked about it enough already, is the idea of removing AHT from scorecards. And I know, operationally, I've done it with clients. We've done it, and not only does it improve employee engagement, but shockingly, it improves customer sat, and even more shockingly, more often than not, there's actually a reduction or stabilization in handle time, contrary to the fear that it will spike. But another example I'll give would be where and I think Jonathan, if it's the Jonathan I think I know from my past, might be in workforce management. So I'm going to give a workforce management example, which is of adding in or removing scheduled breaks and having flex break time. So there's certainly a lot of fear in the idea that if you don't schedule breaks in a very specific allotted time, you will have people taking all their breaks together. You will have people abusing breaks. You will have poor availability. And depending on the size of your workforce, certainly with very small workforces, there's challenges there. But if you're a medium or large size contact center, you can actually start to really predict based on shift start times when breaks when breaks might be taken. You can put people into window groups where you have a bunch of people in a group of, let's say, between 10 and 1 o'clock. You can take your 15-minute break. And we piloted this when I was, I don't know, some of the people on the call know me. I was one of the people that helped to launch and build Sonnet Insurance. So we piloted this there. And it's a huge win. You have to imagine from especially contact centers that are tightly managing schedule adherence. And when you're on a call with a customer, you talk about the adverse effects of AHT, but the adverse effects of a scheduled break with schedule adherence can be pretty high. What you end up having is you have employees that either feel like they have to get off the call because they're going to go too far outside of schedule adherence, or they avoid taking a call and get themselves out of the queue before their break, so their 15-minute break actually becomes a 20-minute break. Or if they're a contact center with a very long handle time, their 15-minute break can become a 30-minute break because they could be stuck on a call that long. So there's so many negatives to the idea of a scheduled break, not to mention biologically we don't always work on a clock, or we may have personal issues we have to deal with, banking, doctors, things we have to call, schools if we're parents. So the idea of making breaks within a large window was certainly not attractive at first when we talked about doing it, but it is a big win. It's very doable without impact to service level, and the best advice I would give is, of course, beta test. Do it in a pilot period of time, get some data, prove the results, and then roll it out.
Okay, great, Neal. Thank you for that. That's a great example in terms of being able to help sell that to, to the executive team. And Marty, quick Q&A question for you as well. And this one is just in terms of technology. I know you do a lot of rollouts with unified communications, cloud contact center, et cetera. What's one quick tip you would give people as far as what can help in terms of doing this kind of an IT rollout that actually will help improve employee engagement, or at least not damage it in terms of agents getting new technology like this? So Marty, what are your thoughts on that?
The contact center is very different than almost any other kind of rollout. And one of the things that we find very effective when it comes to bringing new technology to the contact center is to engage the leadership, the user group, not just the IT side. So we like to see when new solutions are proposed that basically proof of concept surveys and things are set up for the agent group, the leadership group, as well as the IT side, so that you're getting buy-in from the whole organization prior to implementing that solution. And it becomes very important because the key to success often is people accepting the technology, using it properly. If you give someone a chance to be part of that decision process, have input, and be on the selection committee, they're going to become a champion for their choices. And it seems incredibly simple on certain levels, but it goes an incredibly long way into the success of the product being used in your environment. Because I'm pretty sure everybody at a contact center leadership level has seen good products fail in an environment because of no buy-in.
Great points as well about getting that buy-in. That's so crucial when it comes to these kinds of rollouts. And Marty and Erica and Neal, I want to thank all of you as well for being involved in this webinar. You've had a chance to share ideas. I know that I've definitely learned a lot from all three of you as well, and I think our attendees did as well. So thank you very much for doing that.
Oh, thanks for having us.
Thanks, Mike.
You're very welcome. And just to wrap up for today's session as well, one last thing I'll share is just additional thank yous as well. So obviously to the three of you as panelists, as well as I want to thank all the attendees as well. We had a number of attendees from GTAC, the Greater Toronto Area Contact Center Association, and also attendees from all across Canada and the US as well. So I want to thank all of you for being a part of this session. And just a reminder as well for those of you in the Toronto area that the GTAC conference will be taking place on November the 8th. And it's taking place near the airport in Toronto, Pearson Airport. And a quick reminder as well, that you can save $100 per ticket if you register by October 15th. That's this Monday. To register by October 15th for the conference itself. And also want to thank Intelligence as well, which is a proud silver sponsor for this conference. And I know Marty will see some of your folks, I guess, at the conference as well. And also want to thank as well two people behind the scenes, Selena Marcus and also Yana as well, both of whom were very active in terms of being able to help organize and promote this webinar going forward. And so thank you all very much to the panel and to all the attendees for being a part of this webinar. And as well, there'll be a recorded version of this webinar available in a couple of days or in a few days. And so for everyone who signed up for the webinar, you'll actually get the little email. We'll have the link to the recording. So if you want to either see this again or write down some of the key tips that our panel gave, or be able to go and share this with other people in your organization as well, to help them see and gain these tips as well, you can feel free to go and do that as well. And so the webinar recording link will be sent out within a few days to you. So thank you very much for being a part of this webinar, both the attendees and the panelists as well, and also look forward to hearing more from you again in the future. We do another one of these. So thank you all very much, and have a wonderful day.